In 1492, Christopher Columbus wrote in his journal that he had discovered a new world. But for the tens of millions of people already living here, people who had built cities, charted the stars, and governed themselves through sophisticated law, there was nothing new about it at all. This is the story of what Columbus never discovered. The real civilization, the real America, the one they didn't teach you about. For centuries, European settlers, and later American historians, promoted a powerful myth that the land Columbus and his successors discovered was essentially empty, a wilderness, untamed, waiting. This idea, and sometimes called the myth of the Virgin Land, served a very specific political purpose. If the land was empty, no one had to answer for taking it. But the land was not empty. Scholars today estimate that between 50 and 100 million people lived in the Americas before European contact. That is, more than the entire population of Europe at the time. They were not scattered primitives. They were farmers, engineers, diplomats, astronomers, and city builders. And their story is one of the most important and most deliberately hidden chapters in all of human history. The story of the first Americans begins at least 15,000 years ago, and some evidence pushes that date back even further, perhaps to 30,000 years or more. The dominant theory for decades was the Bering Land Bridge, that hunters followed woolly mammoths across a land connection between Siberia and Alaska during the last ice age. But new research complicates that story. Archaeological sites in Chile, Brazil, and even the American Southeast suggest that humans may have arrived by sea, hugging the Pacific coastline long before an inland corridor opened through the ice sheets. What we know for certain is this. By the time Europe was building its medieval cathedrals, the Americas were home to thousands of distinct nations, each with their own language, religion, government, and relationship with the land. They were not one people. They were thousands of peoples, as different from each other as the French are from the Japanese, and together they had built something the world had never seen. Imagine a map of North America in the year 1000 AD. In the Mississippi River Valley, a city is under construction, one that will soon be larger than London. In the deserts of New Mexico, astronomers are aligning stone buildings to the movement of the sun and moon with perfect precision. In the forests of upstate New York, diplomats are drafting a constitution that will later inspire the founders of the United States. On the Pacific coast, seafarers are crossing open ocean in plank canoes. In the Ohio River Valley, artists are crafting copper into objects of breathtaking beauty and trading them across thousands of miles. This is not Europe. This is not Asia. This is America, and it is fully, magnificently alive. Now imagine you are standing in what is today southern Illinois in the year 1100 AD. Around you stretches one of the largest cities in the world. Tens of thousands of people live here. Massive earthen pyramids rise above a planned grid of streets and plazas. The central pyramid, called Monk's Mound today, is larger at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza. You are standing in Cahokia, and you have never heard of it because American history largely forgot it ever existed. Cahokia was the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico. At its peak around 1100 AD, its population may have reached 20,000, making it larger than London at the same time. It was the center of the Mississippian culture, a civilization that stretched across much of eastern North America. The city was meticulously planned. Monk's Mound, the Great Central Pyramid, required 22 million cubic feet of earth, moved entirely by hand. It took generations to build. Around it, more than 120 smaller mounds arranged in geometric patterns across 6 square miles. Cahokia also had a woodhenge, a circle of massive wooden posts used to track the solstices and equinoxes with remarkable accuracy, much like Stonehenge in England, but built from timber in the American heartland. And here is something that should stop you cold. This city this metropolis, this monument of human achievement, does not appear in most American history textbooks. It is not on most lists of ancient wonders. It is not a household name. Ask any 10 people on the street if they have heard of Cahokia. Chances are 9 will say no, that silence is not an accident. It is a choice. By 1350 AD, Cahokia was essentially abandoned. Why? Historians and archaeologists are still debating the answer. Climate change may have played a role. A prolonged drought that disrupted the agricultural systems the city depended on. Political instability, population pressure, and perhaps the exhaustion of surrounding forests for fuel and construction all may have contributed. What is striking is what did not destroy Cahokia: European contact. The city collapsed on its own terms a century and a half before Columbus ever sailed. When French explorers arrived in the 1600s, they found the mounds still standing, mysterious, enormous, and silent. The local people they encountered had no memory of who built them. Today, Monk's Mound sits in a state historic site in Collinsville, Illinois, surrounded by a highway, a suburb, and a casino. It is the largest prehistoric earthwork in the Western Hemisphere, and most people drive past it without knowing what they are looking at.
1,000 miles to the west, in what is now New Mexico, another civilization was performing feats of engineering and astronomy that continue to astonish researchers today. The ancestral Puebloans, sometimes called the Anasazi, though many native scholars prefer the term ancestral Puebloans, built a network of massive stone structures in Chaco Canyon beginning around 850 AD. The largest of these, Pueblo Bonito, contained over 650 rooms and stood 4 stories tall. It was the largest building in North America until the 1880s.
But what makes Chaco truly remarkable is not just its size, it is its precision. The buildings were aligned to track the movements of the sun and moon with extraordinary accuracy. A spiral petroglyph carved into a cliff face marks the summer solstice with a dagger of light at noon, a solar calendar cut into stone, and the roads. Roads ran straight across the desert for miles in every direction, not following the terrain, but cutting through it. Archaeologists are still debating what these roads were for. They were far too wide for practical foot traffic. Many believe they were roads for ritual, for connecting the living to the sacred, for moving something more important than goods: meaning.
Radiating out from Chaco Canyon was a road system unlike anything else in pre-Columbian North America. Archaeologists have mapped more than 400 miles of these roads, straight lines that cut directly across hills and gullies rather than going around them. Many are 30 feet wide, far wider than any practical foot traffic would require. They connect Chaco to dozens of outlier communities scattered across the Four Corners region, what we now call New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. The roads appear to have been used for pilgrimages, for the transport of timber from forests 50 miles away, and for maintaining a vast ceremonial and economic network. At its peak, the Chaco system may have organized the lives of tens of thousands of people across 40,000 square miles. Think about that. 40,000 square miles. Coordinated, planned, connected, without wheels, without horses, without metal tools, with nothing but human knowledge, human labor, and an intimate understanding of the land and the sky.
The ancestral Puebloan world extended far beyond Chaco Canyon. Across the Four Corners region, thousands of communities carved homes into canyon walls, built multi-story apartment complexes on mesa tops, and developed water management systems capable of sustaining agriculture in one of the driest environments in North America. Mesa Verde, in what is now Colorado, contains the most spectacular of these cliff dwellings, structures built into the overhanging alcoves of canyon walls,
accessible only by hand and toe holds carved into the stone. Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde has 150 rooms and 23 kivas, circular ceremonial chambers sunk into the earth. It was home to perhaps 100 to 150 people, yet it required engineering skill and communal organization that few societies in the medieval world could match. These people did not live in caves. They built cities inside cliffs. There is a difference, and it matters.
Now let's travel east to the forests of what is now upstate New York and southern Canada. Here, centuries before the American Revolution, 5 nations, the Mohawk, Onondaga, Cayuga, Oneida, and Seneca, came together to form one of the most sophisticated governing systems the world had ever seen. They called themselves the Haudenosaunee, meaning people of the Longhouse. Europeans called them the Iroquois. Their government, known as the Great Law of Peace, established a democratic confederacy with a bicameral legislature, a process for peaceful resolution of disputes, and protections for individual rights, including rights for women, who held the authority to select and remove leaders. Many historians and political scholars now argue that the Haudenosaunee Great Law directly influenced the framers of the United States Constitution. Benjamin Franklin himself wrote admiringly of the Iroquois system. The idea of uniting separate sovereign states under a shared framework of law? They had already figured that out centuries earlier.
The Great Law of Peace, the Guyana-Shagoa in Haudenosaunee, is one of the world's oldest living constitutions. It established a Grand Council of 50 chiefs with procedures for debate, consensus building, and constitutional amendment. It prohibited the murder of prisoners of war without trial. It gave clan mothers, women, veto power over declarations of war. It established the right to freedom of religion and the right to recall leaders who abused their power. When the Continental Congress met to design a new American government, they explicitly discussed the Iroquois model. A 1988 resolution of the United States Congress formally acknowledged this influence. Yet in most American history textbooks, the Haudenosaunee appear in a single paragraph, if at all. A civilization that helped inspire the world's most powerful democracy is treated as a footnote. That is not an oversight. That is erasure.
In 1722, a 6th nation joined the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Tuscarora, who had been driven north from what is now North Carolina after a devastating war with English colonists. The Confederacy took them in. This moment reveals something important. The Haudenosaunee were not a frozen ancient institution. They were a living, adapting government, capable of expanding to absorb new members, to respond to changing conditions, to grow. That is not what we imagine when we think of primitive peoples. That is statecraft.
Cahokia was not alone. It was the capital, the beating heart of a broader Mississippian world that stretched from Wisconsin to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Great Plains to the Atlantic coast. This was not a single empire, but something more like a shared cultural and trade universe. Archaeologists have found evidence of obsidian from Wyoming in Florida burial mounds, copper from the Great Lakes in Georgia, shells from the Gulf Coast in Illinois and Wisconsin. Ideas, technologies, and religious symbols moved across thousands of miles through networks of rivers and overland trails. The great rivers, the Mississippi, the Missouri, the Ohio, were the highways of this continental trade system, and the communities that lined their banks were not isolated villages. They were nodes in a network, connected, informed, and interdependent.
The Mississippians were also extraordinary artists. Their copper engravings, ceramic figures, and shell gorgets, ornamental discs worn around the neck, display a sophisticated symbolic language
that archaeologists call the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex. Recurring motifs include the weeping eye, the falcon warrior, the cross in circle representing the four directions, and intricate depictions of cosmic battles between underworld serpents and sky beings. These were not mere decorations. They were theological statements, political declarations, and identifiers of rank and lineage. The craftsmanship rivals anything produced in Europe during the same period, and it was made without iron tools. Without iron tools. Let that settle for a moment.
Among the great nations of the Southeast, the Cherokee stand as one of the most remarkable examples of cultural sophistication and political depth. Long before European contact, the Cherokee occupied a homeland stretching across the southern Appalachian Mountains, parts of present-day North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama. They governed themselves through a confederacy of towns, each with its own council and chief. Their society was matrilineal. Family identity and property passed through the mother's line. Women held significant political authority. The Cherokee were also master farmers, cultivating the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, in the rich mountain valleys. Their agricultural knowledge would eventually feed European settlers who had no idea how to grow food in the American climate. When those settlers arrived, they did not find a wilderness. They found a landscape that had been cultivated, managed, and tended for thousands of years. They called it wilderness anyway.
Perhaps the most underappreciated achievement of the Southwest civilizations was their mastery of water. In a region where rainfall averages less than 10 inches per year, the Hohokam people of what is now central Arizona built a canal system that is still astonishing engineers today. By 1300 AD, the Hohokam had constructed over 500 miles of canals across the Salt and Gila River valleys. These canals were up to 10 feet deep and 30 feet wide, and they irrigated tens of thousands of acres of farmland. The modern city of Phoenix, Arizona was built directly on top of this ancient Hohokam canal network. The engineers who designed Phoenix's water system in the 1860s simply reused and extended what the Hohokam had already built over 1,000 years before. Phoenix is, quite literally, a city built on indigenous infrastructure. Along the Pacific coast, from Alaska down through California and Oregon, lived some of the most culturally diverse peoples on Earth. The Northwest Coast nations, the Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian, Kwakwaka'wakw, and many others, developed sophisticated societies based on the extraordinary abundance of salmon, cedar forests, and ocean resources. These were among the wealthiest hunter-gatherer societies ever known. The totem poles for which they are famous are not religious idols, as missionaries often claimed. They are family histories, carved genealogies recording the lineages, crests, and significant events of specific clans. A totem pole is, in effect, a library carved in cedar. The potlatch ceremony, central to Northwest Coast culture, was a feast and gift-giving event that served as the primary mechanism for redistributing wealth across communities, a sophisticated economic system that missionaries and the Canadian and American governments spent decades trying to outlaw. They tried to outlaw generosity, because generosity in the wrong hands is a threat to colonial economics. Perhaps no image in American popular culture is more instantly recognizable than the Plains warrior on horseback. But here is what most people don't know. Horses were not native to North America. They had gone extinct on the continent roughly 10,000 years ago. When the Spanish reintroduced horses in the 1500s and 1600s, the transformation of Plains cultures was rapid and dramatic. But the foundation of Plains civilization existed long before the horse arrived. Nations like the Lakota, Comanche, Cheyenne, Crow, and Arapaho had complex social structures, extensive trade networks, and rich ceremonial lives centered on the vast buffalo herds that roamed the Great Plains. The buffalo was not just food, it was the center of an entire civilization. From the buffalo came food, clothing, shelter, tools, rope, fuel, and religious meaning. To live with the buffalo was to live within a complete ecological and spiritual system, one that required deep knowledge, careful observation, and communal discipline to sustain. In the far north, Alaska, northern Canada, and Greenland, the Inuit and Yupik peoples developed what may be the most technically sophisticated survival systems in human history. The igloo is a masterpiece of thermal physics, engineered to retain body heat in an environment where winter temperatures drop to 70 below zero. The kayak is a watercraft so well designed that modern engineers still study it, nearly impossible to capsize and capable of being rolled upright from underwater by its paddler. The Inuit clothing system, layered furs designed to trap air and wick moisture, is more thermally efficient than most modern cold weather gear. These are not the inventions of a primitive people. These are the inventions of genius, of people who understood their environment so deeply that they could survive and thrive where almost nothing else alive can. For much of the 20th century, the Amazon basin was considered an unlikely place for advanced civilization. The logic seemed sound. The rainforest soil is notoriously poor, the environment hostile, the jungle impenetrable. Anthropologists assumed only small, scattered hunter-gatherer bands could have lived there. Then archaeologists began finding something extraordinary. Scattered throughout the Amazon basin is a mysterious black soil called terra preta, meaning dark earth, that is extraordinarily fertile, rich in charcoal, bone, and organic matter. Unlike the normal red laterite soil of the Amazon, terra preta does not exhaust itself, it regenerates. Scientists now believe terra preta was deliberately created by human beings over hundreds or thousands of years, an agricultural technology of staggering sophistication. And using LIDAR technology, laser scanning that can see through the jungle canopy, archaeologists have in recent years revealed something that would have seemed impossible to earlier researchers. The Amazon was home to large, interconnected urban settlements. In the Llanos de Mojos region of Bolivia, researchers have found a network of more than 20 connected settlements, linked by raised causeways and canals, capable of supporting a population of tens of thousands. The Amazon was not a pristine wilderness untouched by human hands. It was a garden, a civilization-scale garden managed and cultivated over millennia. When Europeans first entered the Amazon in the 1540s, the Spanish explorer Francisco de Orellana reported passing enormous cities along the river for miles. His reports were dismissed for centuries as fantasy. LIDAR has proven he was telling the truth. One of the most profound and most under-acknowledged contributions of Native American civilizations to the modern world is agricultural. The plants domesticated in the Americas are corn, potatoes, tomatoes, beans, squash, peppers, chocolate, vanilla, peanuts, avocados, pineapples, and dozens more transformed human nutrition across the entire globe. Some historians estimate that 3/5 of all food crops grown in the world today were first domesticated by indigenous peoples of the Americas. Corn, maize, is the most important crop on Earth by total tonnage produced, but it did not exist in nature. It was created by human selective breeding over thousands of years from a wild grass called teosinte. The development of maize represents one of the most significant acts of genetic engineering in human history, achieved entirely through indigenous agricultural science. Without Native American agriculture, there would be no pizza, no tomato sauce, no French fries, no potato, no chocolate, no chili, no vanilla ice cream. The food on your plate tonight is, in large part, indigenous intellectual property.
Everything we have seen in this documentary, the cities, the trade networks, the astronomical knowledge, the agricultural systems, the democratic governments, was nearly erased within a century of European contact. The primary cause was not warfare, as popular history often suggests. It was disease. The indigenous peoples of the Americas had no immunity to the diseases Europeans brought with them. Smallpox, measles, influenza, typhus, bubonic plague. The death toll was catastrophic beyond any historical parallel. Scholars now estimate that between 1492 and 1650, the indigenous population of the Americas declined by as much as 90%. To understand the scale of this, if the United States today lost 90% of its population, 300 million people would die. That is what happened. That is the number we are talking about. When the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth in 1620, they found what they called a wilderness, cleared fields and abandoned villages. They interpreted this as a divine gift. God had prepared the land for their arrival. In reality, they were walking through the aftermath of an epidemic. Plague had swept through the coastal New England tribes between 1616 and 1619, killing an estimated 90% of the Wampanoag, Massachusetts, and Patuxent nations. The wilderness was a graveyard. Disease was the first catastrophe. Forced erasure was the second, and it was deliberate. The 1830 Indian Removal Act forced the 5 major southeastern nations from their ancestral homelands in what became known as the Trail of Tears. Thousands died on the forced march to Oklahoma. From the 1870s through the 1970s, the U.S. government ran a system of Indian boarding schools with an explicit mission summarized by their founder, Richard Henry Pratt, as "Kill the Indian in him and save the man." Native children were forcibly removed from their families, forbidden to speak their languages or practice their religions, and punished brutally for any expression of their cultural identity. Over 150,000 children passed through this system. Many never came home. In 2022, the U.S. Department of the Interior released a formal investigative report documenting over 50 burial sites associated with federal Indian boarding schools. Children who died and were buried far from their families in unmarked graves. This is not ancient history. The last of these schools closed in 1973. And yet, here is what is extraordinary: what kept so much survive. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy still meets. The Grand Council still convenes. The Great Law of Peace is still recited.
Among our people.
The Cherokee Nation today has over 400,000 enrolled citizens and operates its own government, courts, health system, and language preservation programs. The Navajo Nation, the Diné, is the largest native nation in the United States, with 27,000 square miles of sovereign territory spanning Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico. The Lakota language is being taught in tribal schools. Dozens of nations across the country operate language immersion programs for children, fighting to bring their languages back from the edge of extinction. Ceremonial traditions suppressed for generations are being revived. The knowledge of traditional plant medicine, agricultural practice, and ecological land management is being documented, practiced, and passed on. Native American civilizations were not destroyed. They were interrupted. They continue. History is never just about the past. It is about what we choose to remember, what we choose to teach, and what those choices say about who we are and what we value. For generations, American history education told a story of an empty continent waiting to be civilized. That story served a purpose. It made the displacement of millions of people seem inevitable, even righteous. The evidence was always there, hidden in plain sight. The mounds still rise above the cornfields of Illinois. The cliff dwellings still stand in the canyon walls of Colorado. The Great Law of Peace is still recited in Haudenosaunee councils.
Spirits of those who came before us, let the truth be spoken plainly.
The question was never whether these civilizations existed. The question is why we chose not to see them. And now that we can see them, what are we going to do about it? The real story of America before Columbus is not a story of a savage wilderness waiting to be tamed. It is the story of thousands of years of human achievement, ingenuity, and civilization. It is the story of cities that rivaled London, of astronomical knowledge that matched anything in the old world, of democratic systems that inspired the founding fathers.
Let us deliberate with clear minds and a single voice for the welfare of the people.
Of agricultural innovations that feed the planet today, of ecological knowledge that we are only now beginning to understand and appreciate. It is also a story of catastrophic loss. Populations decimated, languages silenced, cultures suppressed, and histories erased. But above all, it is a story of survival.
Hey-ya-ho! Hey-ya! Hey-ya-ho!
The descendants of these civilizations are here. They are still building, still governing, still teaching, still fighting for their land and their stories. The Haudenosaunee still meet in council, the Cherokee still govern, the Lakota still drum, the Diné still weave, the Chumash still paddle their tomals across the Santa Barbara Channel. Cahokia was not a beginning and an end. It was one chapter in a story that is still being written. We didn't discover America. We just stopped pretending we were the first ones here. If this history surprised you, if you found yourself thinking, why didn't I learn this? That reaction is itself part of the story. Share this video. Tell someone. The description below includes books and resources from native scholars who have been telling this story for decades, even when the mainstream wasn't listening. Subscribe to Unfinished History USA, because this is just the beginning.